Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby and welcome to episode 12. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for 4,000 subscribers. It's very exciting. I've been having a lot of fun sharing all of my makes and all of my little crafty updates with you, so thank you so much for being here. I also want to thank you for all of the comments and interaction I've gotten on my last video. It's really helped a lot. And if you haven't seen my last video, I plan to donate all of the ad revenue I get from that video to Brew and Make With You, which is fundraising for mutual aid for families in the Minneapolis area. I will link that up in the corner. If you want to just let that play in the background while you watch this video, that would be super helpful to get the views up, and hopefully we can raise some more money for that. But I also have a very exciting announcement. If you follow me on Instagram, you have probably already seen this, and you've also seen me kind of work through some kinks and kind of figure out exactly how I wanted to approach this. But let me show you. I alluded to stickers. They are here. Here she is. Oh my gosh. I am absolutely so excited and so elated with how they turned out. I commissioned this artwork from my friend Bianca, who I will have linked in the description, but yeah, I'm just so excited. They turned out so great. I have these available for sale on my Etsy, which I will have linked in the description if you are interested. I'm also kind of playing around with the idea of getting some tote bags printed and maybe t-shirts, so stay tuned for future updates on that. If you want to get the sticker, check out the listing on Etsy. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into a traditional podcast format where we'll talk about my finished objects, my whips, some acquisitions, which I do have a few, and I also have some sewing updates for you, so stay tuned until the end if you want to hear about that. So first, let's talk about the elephant in the room, my first finished object and what I'm wearing today. This is the Loon sweater by CM Knits, and this is the sweater that I knit for the Granola Girl knit along that I'm hosting, so I'm so very excited to have this finished. So for this, I knit the size large, and I knit this in Knitting for Olive Heavy Merino. The main color is rust, and the contrast colors are oatmeal and brown bear. And I also knit this on a 4.5mm needle. The ribbing was done in 4mm and the cuffs in 3.5mm, so let's get into that. First of all, this is probably one of my favorite sweaters that I have ever made. It's one of those sweaters that kind of looks like it could be store-bought, and I've gotten quite a few compliments on it, and when I say I made it, everyone's like, what? So that's just so cool. I love how the colors turned out, and I was a little bit concerned with some of the construction aspects, so we'll get into that. I will say knitting flat is a huge pain, but it is absolutely worth the finished result. It did take me a full day to knit each of the charts, because there's one on the front and the back. So it was definitely a labor of love, and I didn't do anything special when it comes to catching my floats. And I just really made sure that I had enough slack in between my floats so that way there was no like bunching or any kind of puckering with the color work. So I think it turned out pretty good. I will say heavy merino kind of blooms and softens really nicely, so I feel like the color work definitely lays very flat. I was also concerned with the minimal neck shaping that this pattern has, and I was really worried that like this wouldn't fit over my head, but I think I'm just used to like a traditional like European construction where you have the trapezoid in the back, which you do start by casting on in the back and you do some short rows, but the seam on the shoulder sits on the top of the shoulder, and I'm used to it sitting kind of further back. So when I was working up the neck shaping, I was like, there is no way this is going to fit over my head, but it does kind of sit forward a little bit more, and because of that, the neck sits a little bit higher as well. It doesn't quite bother me, but just something to note if you're going to make this, just be mindful of your pickup and just be mindful of your tension when you're kind of making your collar. So because of that, the collar was a whole debacle for me too, since I was so concerned about the fit. I first picked up the collar on 4.5mm needles, which is what the pattern calls for. It does not suggest that you downsize for your ribbing, so that must just be the way that she knits in her tension. But for me, I definitely wanted to size down because I initially knit a single layer 1x1 rib collar on 4.5mm needles, and I did not like how the tension turned out. And I also did a contrast bind off. So I used Brown Bear as a little contrast strip on the top, and I did not like how that turned out either. So I ended up picking up my stitches just after where I picked up stitches for the neckline. I re-knit it on 4mm needles, so my pickup was still 4.5, and then I knit a double folded collar, then knit it down very loosely. I also did 20 rows on this as well, so I think it creates like just the perfect little collar. Like I said, it does tend to sit up a little bit more, which I am okay with. I did find that adding the sleeves definitely helped to kind of like pull the sweater down and relax it a little bit. So yeah, that was a whole debacle, and I was just so concerned about it fitting, but it is completely fine. For the body, I also cropped the length a little bit, and I knit the body ribbing for 12 rows on 4mm needles. And then for the sleeves, I did pick up to pattern, and then I did 17 sets of decreases. I then did 10 rows of ribbing for the cuffs, and then I knit the cuffs on 3.5mm needles, and that's just because I didn't have a 9-inch 4mm needle. And then another thing to note is for all of the bind offs, I did 2 rows of double knitting, and then I did an Italian bind off. And that's just a personal preference. I just really like the way that the edges look with the 2 rows of double knitting. It makes it look so professional and so clean. I'm very happy that I did that. And yeah, overall, I am super happy with this sweater. I have been wearing it quite a bit, and I find it very comfortable. I do really like heavy merino, so that's great to know for the future because I would love to make some more sweaters out of it. And yeah, that is my loon sweater by CM Knits. The next finished object we have is the Lentil Tote by Natalee here on YouTube and also Instagram. I'm sure you've seen the tote that she just came out with recently, which is a felted tote bag called the Legume Tote, which is so freaking adorable. And then I saw that she had posted just the little mini kind of bag charm size with the intentions of all of the proceeds going to mutual aid funding in either Minnesota or in her local area, which is amazing. So I was very excited to not only support a wonderful cause, but to support Natalee as well. Without further ado, we have one of the cutest things I've ever made. This is the Lentil Tote. So cute. And it's made out of the leftovers from my loon sweater. This is my first time felting anything also. I held this yarn double and knit it on a 6mm needle, and I was able to hit gauge perfectly. I did have to run this in the wash a few times to get it to felt properly, with some towels in the wash as well on a super hot cycle, so keep that in mind. I had never felted anything before, so it was really cool to see the process. And this was one of those projects that I just had to cast on immediately. Definitely more of like a dopamine cast on, and I'm very glad that I did because it was super quick to knit up. The construction is just so different. I see this project as a great palette cleanser in between bigger projects you may have going on because it's quick, it uses up some scrap yarn, and the construction is just really cool. You can tell that the pattern is extremely well thought out, and it's also very easy to follow, so props to Natalee on that. But if you haven't checked out her Legume Tote, I definitely recommend that. I will have that linked in the description, as well as the Lentil Tote if you're just interested in the little guy. Next up, we have my bandana Sophie scarf. And I do air quotations because I don't actually have the pattern, but it's basically a Sophie scarf. So let's get into the details. Here she is in all of her glory. So beautiful. I love the color. Can you guess? This is knitting for olive merino in the color Dusty Artichoke. I knit this on a 3.25mm needle, and I basically was just going off of the measurements of my little bandana scarves that I like to wear. I just wanted like a knit version of that. So I took the measurements from that, and so I increased every 8 rows until I got about 2.5 inches wide, and that ended up being about 8.5 inches long. So I just knit until 23 inches total and then started decreasing from there because I wanted my length to be around 32 inches. So by the end of it, it ended up being 31.5 inches. And I kind of just wanted to be mindful of how much it would grow with blocking. And come to find out, it grew quite a bit more with blocking. So it ended up being 36.5 inches long, which is totally okay. It still fits great, and you definitely still get the idea. This is a yarn that I've had in stash for quite a while, so it was nice to at least use up a little bit of it, but I do still have quite a bit left, so I'll definitely have to figure out what I want to do with that. But I also kind of wanted to use this as like a test to see how I felt about knitting with fingering weight yarn because I found it to be quite intimidating. But it actually went really well, and it didn't quite take as long as I thought it would. I actually find that I kind of enjoy working with such a small needle and a small yarn, so we'll talk about that here in just a bit with one of my other whips coming up. I can definitely see myself making more of these, although I would like to do kind of different stitch patterns, so you'll see that in one of my whips as well. Also, I'm sorry if you can hear any kind of background noise happening right now. I have Rowan and her bouncer right next to me and she's going a little bit crazy, so I'm sorry if you hear anything. But we'll talk about my last finished object. And this is a very exciting one for me because it's been quite a while. I am delighted to tell you that I finished my socks. So cute! You'll notice that the stripes are a little bit different, and that's really just because I started to get really low on the purple color, so let's talk about it. So I knit these socks with the Soxploration Shadow Wrap Heel pattern by Denise DeSantis, and I used Quince & Co. Starling in the color Eggplant, which is the purple, and Malbec, which is the magenta color. And I also knit the size 3, so it's 72 stitches, and I used a 2.5mm needle. So this is my first official finished pair of fingering weight socks, and I'm definitely still trying to figure out my sock recipe, but this absolutely taught me a lot. So I did cast on 72 stitches and I realized that that is too big, so that's good to know for the future. I could probably go towards maybe like 68 stitches, so I'll probably try that next. I did 15 rows of ribbing on this and then just kind of did some varying stripes just to keep it interesting, but also just to see what the different widths of stripes look like on a sock, just so I can keep that in mind for the future. These skeins were each 50 grams, and even after using the purple color for the cuff, heel, and the toe, I did still have just a teeny bit left, so I won yarn chicken on that, which is wonderful. But because of that, I just ended up changing this little section of stripes just to make the purple last a little bit longer. And since that part of my sock is going to be in a shoe anyways, it's not that big of a deal. I also just think it's kind of fun that they don't quite match. So when I finished my first sock, I found that I knit it a bit too short. So I went back in, added 8 more rows, and then did my toe decreases, which I did end up doing an anatomical toe, which is a construction I do really like. I feel like they fit a lot better. For that, I did 8 decreases every other row, and then did decreases every single row until I had 10 stitches left, and then did a Kitchener stitch. So that's something I'll definitely be using in the future. So my overall thoughts on this is, for my next pair, I will definitely cast on less stitches, and I'm also not entirely sure if the Shadow Wrap heel is a good fit for me, although I do enjoy the process of knitting this way more than a heel flap and gusset. So I may just adjust the stitches a little bit and see if I can get that to fit better on my next pair. Just something to keep in mind for that. And I'm also not entirely sold on knitting socks. I keep saying that, but I do really enjoy the finished object, but the process I just don't really love. And I honestly think it's just because of knitting on a small circumference. I find that it hurts my hands quite a bit, so I have to take breaks and it's hard for me to really get in a flow with it. I do want to make another pair and I did get yarn for that, so we'll talk about that soon. But sock knitting is definitely not going to be a huge priority for me, but it is something that I would like to work on because I definitely want to find out what my sock recipe is, and maybe after that it will get a lot easier. So we'll see how that goes. Okay, so first, let's talk about my flannel crush cowl by Samantha Guerin. This is something that I have had planned. I've had the yarn in stash. I got the yarn when holiday sales were happening, so this has been sitting in my stash for a bit, and I've been very excited to cast this on. However, I will be frogging this. So let's talk about it. I've been wanting to frog this for a couple of days now, but I wanted to wait to at least show you exactly how far we got before I end up frogging it. So here she is. It's pretty. The colors look really nice, but I have to tell you, and this may be a hot take, I am not a fan of spin cycle yarn. I don't know. Maybe it's the superwash aspect of it. I feel like it's like almost too tightly spun. So it feels kind of ropey and it's not comfortable to work with at all. So this is knit up with spin cycle dyed in the wool in the color Mzuzu, which is the magenta kind of color. And then the dark blue is moon spun in the color Midnight. These are both yarns from Spin Cycle, so they feel exactly the same. Even the moon spun, I feel like, is just like too tightly spun. I don't know. Yeah, it's just not comfortable. I don't enjoy the process of knitting with this at all. So since I don't want to use this yarn, I plan to de-stash it. So if you're interested at all, please let me know. But I do really want to knit this. I find the mosaic pattern to be so much fun. I had so much fun with my grid gambit that I knit by Samantha Guerin, and I knit that in Junction Fiber Mill. So I'm thinking I'll probably get Junction Fiber Mail in some of their sport weight yarns and knit a new version of it. That's kind of what I'm thinking. But yeah, it's a little bit disappointing because I have been anticipating this for so long now, and it's just one of those things. Like, sometimes things are just not meant to be, and you don't know until you know, and you make decisions moving forward. So that's exactly what this is for me. But my next flip is a very exciting one, and also one that has been anticipated for quite a bit now. And this is my Woodfolk by Saskia & Co. She looks so pretty. So I've just finished the first part of the colorwork chart, and it's looking really nice. So I'm knitting the size 4 for this, and I'm knitting it in Knitting for Olive Cotton Merino in the color Mole, which is the brown, and Wheat, which is the lighter color. I really like the way the color work is on this because you have the contrast color at the top, and then the body is knit with the main color, which is the lighter color. So this is my first time kind of doing that combination, which is really fun. And this is also my first fingering weight garment, which is very exciting. Not only that, but it's also my first project from my Make 9 as well. This is something that I know is going to take me quite a while, and I am okay with that. Surprisingly, I do really enjoy working on such small needles. I cast on initially with a 3mm needle, which is what the pattern recommends, and the needle size that the yarn recommends on the label as well. I got to just before the colorwork chart on 3mm needles, and I also did make one left increases, and I just did not like how that looked. It looked super messy, and I felt like the 3mm was just a little bit too open of a gauge. I didn't quite rip all of it out, but I picked up just below the double folded collar, and then I just knit from there on 2.75mm needles, and it looks so much better. And I feel like the ribbing looks okay with the 3mm, so I'm totally fine with that. I find that I really enjoy this yarn. It's 70% cotton and 30% merino, so it's definitely a bit more stiff in texture, but the fabric it creates is really nice. I do have intentions for this kind of being my Christmas sweater, but I am realizing that the fabric is definitely not very sweater-like, but I am okay with that because I feel like this would look super cute, like layered with a turtleneck or something. So if I need it to be a little bit warmer, I can always layer with it. I'd like to wear this year-round anyways, so I feel like it will be comfortable and suitable for year-round as well. But yeah, so I'm having a lot of fun knitting up the color work. I will say I did not size up my needles for the first part of the colorwork chart, but I think I will for the rest of it. So I think I'll knit the colorwork on 3mm just to make sure that I don't have any puckering. Hopefully that's not a mistake not doing that on the first bit, but we'll see. Worst case, I have to frog and knit it again, but I think it'll be fine. But that's my Woodfolk, and I am very, very excited to see this pattern work up. Okay, next up we have this is a little bit of a chaotic cast on. This is turned into a mini jaunty shawl by Andrea Mowry. It's pretty. I like the colors on this. So I'm knitting this with Patton's Croy socks. It's the FX version of their sock yarn, so it's color changing in the color Copper Colors, and I'm knitting this on a 3.25mm needle. I recently took a little trip to Michael's, and I picked up 2 skeins of this yarn with the intention of making socks. And I did cast on a pair of socks with this because I thought it would be a super cute project on the little snow day that we had. I got like maybe 3 inches into the leg, and I just realized that I did not like how dense the fabric was. I decided to frog that and pivot. And I've been kind of thinking of making like a mini jaunty shawl since I finished my own version of the jaunty that I made. And I thought it would just be cute to kind of have like a Sophie scarf version of that. So I'm kind of going off of the measurements of my bandana scarves again. And I did about 8 increases, and then I'm just knitting straight until I get relatively close to the end of this ball, and then I'll just decrease from there. I did buy a second skein, but I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to need it. And I'm not too worried about the length measurement on this because I know it's going to grow quite a bit. So I'm just going to try to use up pretty much the entire ball of yarn and see where that gets me. But I'm finding that the color changing is really fun, and it's nice and soft and gradient. I feel like, except for this little bit right here, but once it kind of stretches and blocks out, I feel like it will be a little bit more seamless. I just really enjoy working up half fisherman's rib. Ever since I finished the jaunty shawl for my mom, I've kind of been itching to cast on another one. So I thought this little mini version would be perfect. Okay, so my last whip we have to talk about today is my ultimate dopamine cast on. And this is a step-by-step sweater by Florence Miller. She's crazy, but I love it. In the brightest hunter orange you have ever seen in your life. I am knitting the size 4. It's a modified size 4, so I'll get into that. I'm knitting this in Cascade Yarn Eco Plus in the color orange. The color label that's on my skeins of yarn says that it's the color 40, which is marmalade, but after doing some research, I'm not entirely sure that that color is referenced anymore, and I'm pretty sure it's the color orange. Not really sure what that's about. I'm knitting the ribbing on 4.5mm needles and the body on 5.5mm. So here's the story on this. I just recently went to my local yarn store because I got a gift card for Christmas, and so I went to go get the sweater quantity that I need for the traveler hoodie that I want to make. I initially went and I picked up that, but while I was browsing, I found this yarn in their sales section and noticed that they had 3 skeins, which is a sweater's quantity because these hanks are freaking huge. Like, look at how giant this cake is. It's as big as my head. I was like, how perfect would that be? But I was like, it's a little too crazy, and I've spent pretty much all of my gift cards, so it's not going to cover it, so I'm just gonna walk away. But let me tell you, I could not stop thinking about this yarn all night. So I went back the next day and I picked up the 3 skeins they had. It was kind of nice. They were on sale for 20% off, so that was super cool. And it's just one of those things that is just really bringing me joy right now, so we're leaning into it. The color is a little bit crazy. It doesn't feel quite like fluorescent. It looks pretty true to color on camera. It's definitely bright. That's why I'm calling it my hunter orange sweater. I will say, if I find that this color is too bright when I finish the sweater, I may over dye it and kind of mute it down a little bit, so we'll see when I get to that point, but it's so much fun to work up that I'm really excited that it's such a bright and crazy color because it really makes it fun to work on. I did a swatch of this yesterday and I knit it on 5.5mm needles and realized that I hit gauge perfectly for this pattern because I was really unsure exactly like what I wanted to make, and my gauge was like really specific, and this is like the only sweater that I found that I hit gauge on. So I really liked the fabric that 5.5mm created, so I didn't want to adjust that. And since I've made this pattern a few times, I know that I really enjoy it. But I found with the last one that I made, which was the sweater that I made for my boyfriend Tyler, I felt like the fit was just a little bit off. I felt like with his specifically that he could have used a lot more room in the shoulders. And initially the cast on for the shoulders is just 2 stitches. So with that in mind, I decided to kind of alter the shoulder stitches so I would have 8 stitches initially on either side. So I did the size 4 cast on plus 8 stitches because you initially have 2 stitches plus 6. So I cast on the size 4 plus 12 stitches, right? I have all of the information in the notes on the Ravelry project if you're interested. I think that's definitely going to help kind of open up the neck a little bit more, and hopefully that kind of helps it to fit a bit better. So we'll see how that ends up going. Worst case, you know, once I get to a point where I can try it on, if I need to pivot, I'll pivot. But I definitely want to work up this yarn as soon as possible because it's so much fun. Since it's such a big gauge, you know, I'll be able to finish it pretty quickly. So it's nice to have a nice balance between a larger gauge and then my fingering weight garment as well. So if I get bored of either one, I can kind of switch it up. Okay, and the last whip I have to talk about is crochet, which is fun because I haven't done this in a while. It's hard to show because it's one long strip right now. But I started a Easy Peasy Crochet Baby Blanket by Tony Lipsy, which is just a YouTube tutorial, so I'll have that linked below. But my cousin requested a crib-sized baby blanket for her youngest, and so obviously I have to do it. And she specifically requested a black and white checkered blanket. I have used this pattern before for a baby blanket that I made for my daughter, so I'm kind of just going off of the measurements of that in terms of like my square size. So I'm crocheting this in Loops and Threads Impeccable in the color black and cloud, and this is a 100% acrylic yarn on a 5.5mm hook. So I already had the black color in stash, so when I went to Michael's, I just got 2 skeins of cloud, so I think that will be enough. This is definitely more of like a background project because I don't have a timeline on this at all, and it's just nice to kind of change up all the knitting that I have going on. The only thing I'm realizing is the rows. She recommends to do an even amount of rows, and my square is 9 rows high and 15 stitches across, which does give me a perfect square. But I'm realizing now with the second strip, you also connect as you go, that because I have an odd number of rows, I am finishing and connecting where you connect as you go instead of on the outside of the square. So I hope that that is not going to be an issue. I think it will be fine. Worst case, I have to frog and start over, but I'm gonna keep trying that out and see if it works as I work up my second strip. Crochet is fun. It uses a different part of my brain, which I really enjoy. And since I've been working this one up, it's kind of inspired me to finish the granny stitch blanket that I have in hibernation right now, which is using a bunch of like acrylic scrap yarns that I have from all my crochet days. I kind of have that as a goal in the back of my mind that I would love to finish that by the end of the year. So it's going to be super low pressure, but I would like to get that done. Yeah, that's all of my whips that I have to talk about. So we'll next get into some acquisitions, which 2 I have already talked about, being the yarn that I got from Michael's. And the other yarn that I got from my local yarn store for my traveler hoodie is Juniper Moon Patagonia in this beautiful purple color. It's in the color violet. I absolutely love this color. It's a little bit different than the purple that I used in my Olga jacket. It's definitely a bit more lighter and more of like a true purple rather than an eggplant, although it looks different in different lighting. Like, I feel like in direct light, it looks a bit more vibrant. Yeah, I guess it is kind of like an eggplanty purple. But I also really enjoy that it's kind of like, it's not variegated, but it has some kind of depth to the color. It almost looks like it was like a gray wool that was dyed purple. So it's got some like little flecks of gray in it, which is really pretty. I've seen quite a few projects on Ravelry for the Traveler hoodie that have used this yarn, and it looks really nice. And I really wanted to make sure that I could see this in person before I decided on like what color I like, and even if I kind of like the texture of the yarn. I don't know if it's woolen spun, but it's definitely squishy like a woolen spun. It is a 2-ply. I just keep wanting to touch and squish the skein. It's so nice. But this is more of a sport weight yarn, so it's kind of labeled as like a light DK to a sport weight, but it has 382 yards per 100 grams. I have not done a gauge swatch for this yet, just because I've got plenty of sweaters to worry about right now, but this will definitely be coming up in the future, and I'm very excited to work this up. And the last acquisition we have to talk about is a sock yarn. So this is the Explorer Knits and Fibers Cashmere Cavern Sock in the color Pollen, and it's showing up a bit more mustardy. It is definitely like a bright yellow, but I find that it's a bit more on like the chartreusey green yellow side, and it's absolutely beautiful. This is an 80% superwash merino, 10% cashmere, and 10% nylon, and it has 435 yards per 100 grams. This is my first time using Explorer knits. It's something I've been wanting to try out for quite a bit, and the most exciting part is I got this from the Destash That Yarn Discord, which was brought to my attention by Haley, who is Lock Knits here on YouTube and Instagram, so thank you so much for that, friend. It's almost dangerous to be a part of that Discord because you're just constantly getting notifications of people posting this beautiful yarn that they want to get rid of, so I had to mute the notifications after getting this because it was just so tempting to be like, oh, maybe I should get that. But yeah, so I got this at a little bit of a discount, which is great, so thank you, Haley. But I do plan to use this for my next pair of socks. I think that will be very exciting, and it is so soft. I think because of the cashmere. It doesn't really feel like a superwash yarn in the sense that Spin Cycle feels like a superwash yarn. So I think it will be nice to work with. And I also find that it feels a bit different than the Quince & Co. sock yarn that I used. Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of in this phase of wanting to try different sock yarns to see if it really helps me enjoy the process of knitting them more. We'll see how this one goes, and I'm really excited to cast this one on. Okay, friends, that is all of the yarny talk I have for you today. Next up, I have one little sewing update for you because I finished a pair of pants. So stay tuned if you want to hear about that. But if you're just here for the yarn content, thank you so much for being here. Check out the knitter stickers on Instagram if you're interested, and I will see you in my next video. But if you want to hear about my new dance pants, let's talk about it. So I'm still very much trying to figure out exactly what my perfect version of these pants are. This pair I've made the size large like I have with my other 2 pairs. And I sewed this pair in a linen viscose, which is so soft and wonderful. It's so drapey and so comfortable to wear. I initially bought the fabric that I used for my skyline dress that I finished recently for a pair of dance pants, but I accidentally cut the pattern piece too short because the very top piece of the waistband was folded over and I didn't realize it. So I cut the piece too short and there was no saving it after that. I used that fabric for my skyline dress, which I love and is also very comfortable. So I knew that I would love this fabric for a pair of pants. So I placed another order, and this time I picked the color Camel, which is like a perfect Carhartt brown. It's wonderful. I did make some adjustments to the pattern this time, and one of them is not entirely on purpose. So everything was going really smoothly and I was feeling really good about it. And then I sewed together the front and back pieces the wrong way. One was on the wrong side, one was on the right side, and so the seam was on the outside of the pants, and I was like, ugh. And of course I didn't realize it until after I had serged my edges, which is a common theme here. So clearly I haven't learned my lesson, but this one kind of worked out for the better. I don't have the patience to unpick a serged edge. So what I did was I just cut off my finished edge, and then I flipped my piece around. I sewed the two pieces together again with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is what the pattern calls for initially. So overall, I guess I took off about an inch off of the inseam, and I actually kind of like how it turned out because it makes the pants just a little bit less of a drop crotch, and the pants are just a little bit less wide in the leg as well, and I really like how that looks. That may be something that I would consider doing in the future. So a happy accident. But the adjustment that I did on purpose is after wearing the pants for a couple of days, I'm not sure if maybe the fabric just relaxed a little bit or if it kind of stretched when I was sewing the pieces together, although there was no puckering, so I'm not really sure how this happened, but I felt like the pants were too long. On my pattern piece, I did add an inch of length in the leg, but with all of my other pairs, I find that that's perfectly fine. But I think maybe just because this fabric is so drapey and loose that it just kind of adds a little bit more length in the leg. So I ended up cutting off 2.5 inches on the very bottom, and then I did a 1 inch hem on the bottom. So I took about 3 inches off in total, and it sits perfectly on my ankle. So it does kind of have a little bit more of a wide leg look because I lost quite a bit of that taper at the very bottom, but I think it looks completely fine. And since it's so like drapey and it moves so much, like you can't really tell that it looks much different except for the length. So I'm very, very happy with that. This is my first pair of pants that I put a made in 2026 tag on the back, so that's really exciting too. It really feels like a fully official pair of pants, and I've been wearing them a ton, and I can see myself wearing them a lot in the future as well. So as much as I would like to make a million pairs of this pattern, I feel like I'm kind of ready to try like a new pants pattern. So I'd also like to make a pair of shorts, and this has too much of a drop crotch to really kind of make a pair of shorts. So I was kind of thinking maybe making some lane pants or some Pomona pants, because they also include a shorts version in that as well. If you have any suggestions for an elastic waist, high-waisted pair of shorts, I would really appreciate that. But yeah, I am super excited with how my dance pants turned out, and I feel like I kind of have the flow down, and I really feel a lot more comfortable with making this pattern. I did realize when I initially made my mistake on my very first pair of sewing the 2 front pieces together and then the 2 back pieces together for each leg, I had this huge epiphany when I was making my green pair. With my very first pair, I did not do pockets just to keep it super simple, and I realized when going through my instructions again that verbally she says to sew the front and back panels together. And so in my brain, I'm like, okay, so the 2 front panels together and the 2 back panels together. But when she was ironing out her seam, I noticed that the 2 front panels were together as a full front, right? And the full back. It made sense to me because when she laid them flat, there were the pockets. And I was like, epiphany. So thank goodness I haven't made that mistake again, because now I've made pockets on every single version I've made so far. So that was a big thing for me. Like as a beginner, especially, like I'm really such a visual learner, and that whole situation just like really helped me there. So keep that in mind. If you are making these pants for the first time and you hear sew the front and back panels together, don't do it as each leg. Maybe that's common sense, but anyways, I just thought that I should share that because I made a huge realization and it literally changed my life. But yeah, so that is my dance pants, and we'll see what I end up making next. I do have the kite pants in mind, which is on my knitting bingo, but I'm still trying to figure out like exactly what fabric I want to use for that. I was kind of thinking maybe like a cotton twill situation, so that the fabric has a little bit more structure to it, because I just really love the shape of those pants. And I also love that they have the vertical and horizontal stripes in the different panels. I'm having a really hard time deciding what I want to do, but that is the next pattern that's kind of on my brain. We'll see what ends up happening. That is all the updates I have for you today. Thank you so much for being here if you made it this far. And let me remind you just one more time about the last video that I uploaded. If you'd like to play that in the background to kind of help get the views up and the reach a little bit higher so we can hopefully donate a little bit more money to Brew and Make with You. That would be amazing. Also, the knitter stickers that I have on Etsy will be linked in the description if you are interested. Please check those out, and also keep an eye out in the future for maybe some tote bags and maybe some t-shirts. We'll see how that goes. But yes, thank you so much for being here. I hope you are taking care of yourself and the people around you during this very heavy time that's going on right now. I have to say, it's really nice to have our knitting and our hobbies to kind of give us a little bit of dopamine, even though things are really tough right now. So I see you and I hear you, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.